Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Armeni. I'm the Executive Director at Transform Finance and the convener of the Transform Finance Investor Network. I'm delighted to have you join us today for this conversation on activating cash deposits to support Native communities. We're joined today by Native American Bank that will tell us a little bit of background about the issue of financing in Indian country and for Native communities. Tell us about the bank and about their impact deposit model. We are joined by Tom Ogard, Shannon Ward, and Joel Smith that will go on in just a moment. As always, please feel free to chime in with comments or questions through the chat box, or you can raise your hand if you want to speak directly on the webinar. It'll be a very interesting discussion, so I look forward very much to your questions and to your points. Now, this webinar perhaps can be seen as part of a series around the need and the opportunities to provide capital to Native communities. We were involved a few years ago in an effort by Confluence Philanthropy to do a landscaping of different opportunities and different initiatives by impact investors. And since then, of course, with the work of Edgar Villanueva around decolonizing philanthropy, we're glad to have seen an increasing interest here. We also did a webinar a while back around Native energy projects and what community engagement and community ownership can look like in the context of a large-scale, utility-scale renewable energy projects in Native communities. So I encourage you to look back at that if this is an issue of interest. Now, we at Transform Finance were especially interested in today's presentation when the Olamina Fund brought it to our attention, because it combines both the interest in capitalizing Native communities, as we'll see, that have been historically and presently undercapitalized, but also because we have been interested in this total portfolio approach, or in the opportunity to really try to activate for impact all sorts of assets across all asset classes, and that includes cash, that in theory should be one of the easy entry points, right? Moving the deposits, moving the cash management. And you all probably saw Amy Curtis's piece in Impact Alpha last week on the growing attention and somewhat growing options around cash. So let's keep that element in mind. I would love for anyone who has been active on that side as an asset owner to share their experiences, what they have seen in terms of the opportunities for cash management, for impact, if there have been any obstacles or any lessons learned that could be shared with us today. And with that, I will turn it over to Tom, Shannon, and Joel from Native American Bank, with many thanks for joining us.
My name is Tom Ogard. And are we good to go here? Yeah, we're unmuted. Thank you, Andrea.
Yes.
My name is Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
And we're delighted to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to tell about Indian country. We're going to discuss community development in underserved areas, a little bit about what Native American Bank is doing, and then why deposit dollars can be so impactful and really be a game changer. Again, with Shannon Ward and Joel Smith along with me, hopefully we're going to provide you with some takeaways that are meaningful during this webinar today. And I'm not going to delay the start anymore. We're going to have Shannon kick us off. Shannon.
Great, thank you, Tom. So good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're connecting from. I want to start my portion of our presentation with a big thank you to Transform Finance and to each of you for giving us your attention today. As Tom stated, we're delighted to have this opportunity to provide some insight into Indian country and to share the manner in which any person, entity, or organization can assist in furthering our vision. As we begin today's discussion, it's important to put some context around the words and terms of Indian country. What is Indian country? And when we use that term, who or what are we talking about? If you take a look at the map on this slide, you'll see represented by the green areas all of the Indian reservations in the United States. Reservation is a legal designation of area of land managed by a federally recognized Indian tribe, but held in trust by the U.S. government. So we'll talk in a little more detail later about what this trust relationship means. But the point I really want to make is that today, despite being the original inhabitants of this country, Indian trust land totals just about 3% of the total U.S. land base. You can also see Indian reservations are located throughout the country, with a large majority west of the Mississippi River. What isn't depicted on this map, though, is proximity to urban areas. So if you were to overlay a map with population information, you would see that a great majority of these reservations are in less populated areas, which becomes more important as we continue our discussion today. This map demonstrates the areas in which we see higher proportion of populations of Native Americans and Alaska Natives, and where those communities are located. What isn't represented here, though, is non-reservation-based populations. As a result of the 1956 Indian Relocation Act, which was an effort on behalf of the US government to further its Indian termination policy, individual Indians were incentivized to move to urban cities like Denver, Los Angeles, and Minneapolis to become a part of more mainstream communities and culture. Today, there are very large populations, again, proportionately, of Native Americans and Alaska Natives in these urban areas. So when we talk about Indian country, what we're really talking about is both reservation lands and those natives that are living off reservation as well. I'll take the next slide, Andrea. So let's talk a little bit about Indian country demographics. In 2017, 6.8 million people were identified as Native people. And I'm going to refer to Native Americans and Alaska Natives inclusively as natives for the purposes of this discussion, so I don't keep saying that same definition over and over again. But natives are a fast-growing population with a projected population of almost 10 million by 2060. So in 2017, 6.8 were identified as Native. Today, there are 573 federally recognized tribes in the United States. This is an important distinction, as there are tribes that are state recognized, and there are bands or groups of natives who are not federally or state recognized that share a history and culture that are also located within the United States. Presently, there are 326 reservations. Recognized tribes have a reservation. It's worth noting that many of the reservations that tribes now occupy are not their original homelands. Rather, when natives were being displaced, they were relocated to less valuable land as their new home. Today, there are nearly 30,000 native-owned firms in the country. This includes both individually owned and tribally owned firms. And then last, and one particular source of pride for Native Americans is that natives serve in the armed forces at a larger rate per capita than any other ethnic group. So on our next slide, we need to talk about some of the less attractive factors in Indian country. We find that many people, including socially conscious people, have comparatively little background knowledge of the profile of the country's Native American population, the issues they have faced historically and continue to face today, So what we want to do is present some of those less favorable and, quite frankly, gloomy characteristics of Indian country today. It's important to have some context and background with the recognition that it would take years of education to really do justice to the unique history and varied profiles of Indian country as a whole. So for racial ethnic group in the United States, these factors are coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics current population survey from 2016 to 2018. Natives residing in native areas, so on reservations, had a jobless rate of 11.4%. This rate is considerably higher than that of natives who don't live on reservations, so those that are living in non-reservation communities. That is at 6.6%. So %. At the same time, natives were less likely to be working or looking for work. So 59.6% of them participated in the labor force, compared to 62.9% for the overall population. And some of that is due to the lack of jobs that are located on reservations. They simply aren't looking because there aren't jobs. Further, single race natives have the highest percentage in poverty out of any racial group at a staggering rate of 26.2%. Conditions on many reservations resemble third world conditions, as noted by the fact that 4 out of 5 of the poorest counties in the nation are on reservations. 40% of on-reservation homes are substandard, and nearly 1/3 are overcrowded. In a 2013 report that was sponsored by the National American Indian Housing Council, it was found that 40% of on-reservation housing in the United States is considered substandard, compared with 6% of all US housing outside Indian country. In addition to that, nearly 1/3 of reservation homes are overcrowded. Adding to factors is that less than half of these homes are connected to public sewer systems, and 16% lack indoor plumbing. So these are the bleak facts about Indian country today. The next slide. So what has happened? Why is this the case? Why do these factors exist in Indian country? And there's really no simple answer to that question. There's generational traumas that have resulted in a host of social factors that contribute to the dismal state. But we're really here to talk today about, what role have banks played in the issue historically? So a fundamental cause of the impoverished condition of a majority of tribal reservations is tied to a lack of access of traditional banking services that are, widely afforded to off-reservation communities. Historically, banks have not located branches in reservation communities. And when they have, these are primarily deposit-taking branches. They do not make loans historically to the populations of the communities that they serve or are located in. So why has the dreaded term redlining been the practice of traditional banks? There's a number of factors. They don't understand trust land. I mentioned previously that tribal land is held in trust with the Secretary of the Interior of the United States as the trustee. And what this means is that every time a tribe wishes to utilize its land as collateral, it has to be approved. Any action that is taken by a tribe or a leaseholder of tribal land has to be approved by the trustee, who happens to be the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs. So this is a very cumbersome process, and basically it's complicated. That means that banks just really aren't going to take the time to understand that unique relationship, and simply don't want to because of the complexity. Banks have historically not understood tribal jurisdiction. Tribes are not subject to state law. relationship with the federal government that a tribe has. So what this means for tribes is that the laws that normally dictate any contracts, or more specifically loan documentation, there's always a question about whether or not that law pertains to these agreements. And if it's under state law, that isn't the case. There has to be some additional steps that are taken to describe the jurisdiction of documents when you're entering into an agreement with a tribe. Banks have not historically understood sovereignty. So as I mentioned, each tribe has a nation-to-nation relationship with the federal government. Again, this means that the question of how do you exercise your rights under any agreement, how is that exercised if a tribe has sovereignty? Last, they don't understand how to understand tribal government financial capacity. So tribal audits oftentimes contain reporting for both businesses or business-like entities, as well as governmental entities. So this is a mix that is unique and unusual, to say the least, and it's one that can be very confusing if you're not familiar with reviewing and understanding tribal financial reporting. So in the end, what this means is that even well-meaning banks struggle to provide needed capital, really because of a host of challenges that are unique to Indian country. Successfully banking reservations takes a deep understanding of tribal trust land, tribal legal jurisdiction, sovereignty, and how to analyze the financial capacity of governments. Few banks have prioritized this, but this is an expertise that Native American Bank has formed and why we exist today. With that, I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Tom.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm going to take a little bit of time to just talk about Native American Bank's background and why Native American Bank. How did we come to be? What was our origin? And it started in the 90s. The original charter for this bank came through an act of Congress in 1998. Senator Daniel Inouye from Hawaii, along with Eloise Cabell, who's a tribal leader from the Blackfeet Nation in Montana, were very instrumental in getting the legislation passed that got the charter and was awarded. By 2001, the original charter came to fruition through a couple of different things. Capital was raised from a number of Native entities, tribes, and tribal corporations, and Alaska Native corporations. And with those dollars, the bank purchased the Blackfeet National Bank in Browning, Montana, which really became our first location. And we'll hear a little bit more about that later. And from there, we opened an office in Denver to be a central location for primarily Western United States, as you saw on the map. It was the Western US where most of the tribes and reservations are based. It was really to create a nationwide bank that was national in scope to serve Native people, their communities, their government, and their economic entities, and which is really the reason why Native American Bank came about. And as Shannon said, there were so many impediments, so many issues facing Native Americans, and the absence of access to financial capital and services was really the issue at the forefront. And consequently, it is our mission to help provide that realization of self-sufficiency and financial freedom for Indian country. That's a mission we started with, and it is still our mission today. If we go to the next slide, just to give you some context of who supports Native American Bank. This is a map of shareholder ownership throughout the country. We currently have 35 shareholders from all areas of the country, 7 of which are up in Alaska. In the lower right quadrant of this particular slide, you can see that we have 4 what we term socially responsible shareholders. So 31 of the 35 shareholders are either Native tribes or tribal corporations or Alaska Native corporations. And these are really the entities that have provided the capital that have allowed us to grow the bank and support the growing loan portfolio that we have to complete projects and consequently grow jobs, sustain jobs, and be able to provide economic diversity for Native American tribes. And then the next slide really, and for most entities, you have a vision and a mission statement. And we're no different. We look at this constantly to make sure that we are living the vision and the mission. And while we can bank anybody, and we do bank natives and non-natives alike, it is our mission to serve Indian country that really stands out for us. And in the vision, I would just say the vision was to meet the financial needs that Shannon talked about. And then the mission actually is to provide that access to those financial services. And as we continue to go forward year in and year out, those are the fundamentals by which we really take to heart and what we try to live every day. I'm going to turn it over to Joel with a little more context now. Joel?
Thank you, Tom. So you've heard a lot now about Native American Bank's history and some of the work we do. I want to take a moment to synthesize that into verbiage that is more commonly utilized by the impact community to present more on our impact theory. You've heard of the concept of buy local, striving to retain money within a community. Our tribal ownership and our commitment to actually lend within Indian country is our way of retaining more within Indian country. Now, a powerful way that we express that ideal that resonates within Indian country is that we work to create economic sovereignty. We work to create racial equity. We work to create financial inclusion. And a lot of impact investors focus on certain industries, whether it's the green industry or regenerative industries. We work across many different industries because we believe any investment in underserved Native communities is impactful. On the next slide, you'll see a map showing the places that we've done commercial loans over the last several years. If you were to overlay this depiction with the map of the US reservations, you'd get a sense for the degree to which we specialize in helping reservation communities. This shows a lot of what we call mission intensity. As opposed to traditional banks that might dabble in community development lending, our lending is almost exclusively serving our primary mission. Over 95% of our lending in the past 5 years has been in Indian country, meaning to tribal governments, to tribal housing authorities, Alaska Native corporations, or Native-owned businesses. By geography, nearly 90% of our lending supports areas designated to have elevated unemployment, elevated poverty levels, or high concentrations of underserved populations with a large percentage of people living well below average median income levels. Those include opportunity zones, new market tax credits, severely distressed communities, as well as hub zones, which stand for historically underutilized business zones, which really get to the heart of what we're here to help. On the next slide, you'll see a quick heat map depiction of some of the places where our lending is most concentrated. It's overlaid with census tract level poverty rate data. You can see here the Pine Ridge and Rosebud reservations in South Dakota, which are home to 2 of the most impoverished counties in America. You'll see the Blackfeet Reservation, Chippewa Cree, and Fort Belknap reservations there in northern Montana. And in addition to our local lending here in Colorado, you can see a concentration of the work that we do with rural Alaska Native villages, which are a subset of Indian country that has a particularly hard time accessing capital for its own set of reasons. These are often extremely small communities that are completely off of the road system, just a few hundred people, and they deal with extreme weather conditions that make any commercial construction project multitudes of the costs that you see in other communities and make it very hard to get financing. As an example, we provided financing for a few new general stores in these Alaska Native village communities where they could not find capital elsewhere. Next, I wanted to quantify a little bit about our impact activity. We loaned $128 million over the last 5 years in support of $250 million worth of projects, which for a bank our size we're extremely proud of, especially with the amount of leverage that we can provide for spending on projects in addition to the loan capital that we provide. We funded 1.1 million square feet of new building construction. A lot of the projects in reservation communities are construction projects because there's generally not an overabundance of idle facilities out there to acquire or refinance. We have to build it, and that's where we've created another specialty to serve the reservation communities. The companies, the tribes, the projects that NAB has funded provided and retained over 1,700 jobs in that 5-year span, most recently. Next, I wanted to give you one particular project profile that we think is highly impactful and that we're very proud of. The Red Lake Band of Chippewa Reservation in northern Minnesota has a population of 12,000 people. They have a tribal economic development corporation called Ogaconning Inc. and Ogaconning Enterprises, which they do business as Red Lake Inc. They've operated what they call a trading post since 1986, small grocery store, small laundry and gas facilities. The store was dilapidating and did not have much in the way of inventory, so residents were forced to drive 76 miles round trip to Bemidji to get fresh produce and other products. So they came to us with the need for a replacement and expansion. That took the form of a 27,000 square foot building that featured an expanded grocery store, bakery, deli, as well as a C-store and fuel center and a subway. That provided not only retaining the 30 jobs already, but providing 27 new jobs for that community, in addition to 45 construction jobs. And one thing we wanted to highlight particularly is in this project, the construction company that built the facility was one that was owned by the tribe that employed tribal members. And we view that as a great impact multiplier for our projects if we can have a tribally owned company come in to do that work, wherein most projects see that profit from that construction activity leave the reservation to outside firms. On the next slide, just have some quick references to all the different parties involved in that particular transaction, which was a new market tax credit related transaction, which hints to the complexity of the financing. Native American Bank acted as lead lender. We involved a government guarantee through the USDA, CDFI partner participant, the clearinghouse CDFI, as well as a new market tax credit allocatee, the Travoy Group, and the tax credit investor, PNC Bank. I will add that the project also highlights the reality in Indian country that financings can take a lot longer than conventional loans, almost in all cases, and in many cases a lot longer. This project took almost 3 years to close since our first site visit. Reservation deals often get delayed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs in its role as the land trustee, environmental reports and investigations that have to happen, as well as leadership changeover within the tribe, and other deal-specific things that we are used to exercising patience with the projects that we do that a lot of conventional banks are not used to. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon to talk some more about the bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. So we're now going to talk about another project that we've had the opportunity to provide financing to. This is for the Blackfeet Housing Authority. And you'll remember I described previously the dire need for housing on reservation, and importantly, the need for livable housing units. So we're going to discuss that in a little more detail, but before I do that, I do want to just give a little context or a description of what the Blackfeet Reservation is like. It's in extreme northern Montana. It's a rather large land base, under the Blackfeet Reservation. It's very vast and it's very rural. It does, but right next to the eastern entrance to Glacier National Park. That said, it is still quite remote and very rural. As you might expect, the reservation members, those that live there, can experience some very, very harsh winters. There are 11,000 residents that live on the Blackfeet Reservation, and there is a severe shortage of safe housing on that reservation. So the project that we worked on was a loan that was made to the Housing Authority, and this Housing Authority is quite progressive in the way that it manages the authority itself. The Blackfeet Housing Authority rents to own, meaning it builds the units and then rents them to community members. And they continue to rent until the family or community members have qualified to have the home transferred into their name. So they basically walk members through the process of becoming creditworthy. And this can take a very, very long time. The Housing Authority provides financial education and credit counseling. So it assists its members to become eligible for mortgages. They also provide affordable home ownership. So the loan that we actually made in concert with to the Housing Authority was with we leveraged a loan guarantee that is made through HUD, through its Title VI program. And we were able to provide financing for 40 homes that are reserved for tribal members. And each of those tribal members earns an income that is at or below 80% of the average median income for the area. This particular project also has a secondary but very important benefit in that the Blackfeet Housing Authority actually, it employs the labor. So they themselves build the homes. And so while they are providing homes to community members, they are also providing jobs to the community members themselves. So this is a project that we are incredibly honored to have been a part of. It is, to kind of describe the impact that we have in the area, there was in 2013, the Great Falls Tribute ran an expose covering the housing shortage in the area. It was called Crisis in Our Backyard. And in that article, the executive director of the Housing Authority at the time was quoted as saying, "It's not unusual to find a grandma who has 15 people living in her home. Oftentimes they're all living hand to mouth out of a soup pot, while at the same time trying to pay for their electricity to keep their house heated. And so I think that this just really signifies the impact that the types of loans that we make have in the communities that we serve. On the next slide, you'll see a highlight of some of the projects that we're currently working on, so under representative pipeline. Our first project that is highlighted here is a loan that we're working on that will be made to an opioid treatment facility. This will be tribally owned, and it will serve both Native and non-Native clients in Northern California. And I think this is really indicative of the types of loans that Native American Bank makes. So this will have an impact both on the tribe and its particular members, but also the non-natives that are in that area that need access to this type of treatment. But it also will provide a revenue stream that is diverse to the tribe to prop up some of its governmental services. Next, you'll see a loan that we're working on for a tribal elder care facility, and this is in Montana. This is a unique project in that the existing elder care facility that the tribe is currently running is condemned. They have to come up with a solution for the tenants of the elder care facility. If they don't, all of those elder family members will have to go outside of the community, and that's not something that they want to see happen. So we're actually facilitating the financing for this project, both the construction and the permanent financing, with the use of both a USDA loan guarantee on the permanent piece, as well as the loan guarantee offered through the Bureau of Indian Affairs on the construction portion of this. So as you might imagine, these can be highly complicated transactions. And that's really where we set ourselves apart from other banks, is that we've gained the expertise to manage these types of projects. While they can take a very long time to come through to fruition, we have the patience and the willingness to take the necessary steps to see these projects through to fruition, primarily because of the impact that they have on the communities that we serve. You'll also note that we've highlighted a Native nonprofit headquarters building in South Dakota. So this is an interesting project. This Native nonprofit offers a lot of services to the communities it serves, both in consulting. There's some financial education aspects, as well as a loan fund that they operate. And all of these entities are going to be housed out of a headquarters building that's located in South Dakota. Lastly, you'll note that we are working on a loan that will be made to a small business here in Denver. We're all very excited about this. This is a quite well-known restaurant here in the Denver area, and we're excited to be a part of assistance to that particular business. Looking forward, the next slide talks about our NAB locations. So we've talked about the Blackfeet Reservation. We have a full service branch there. So it looks like any community bank that you might walk into. The way that this branch is a little bit different is that our clients in the Blackfeet Reservation have a unique relationship with banks. Not all, but a large portion of our customers in the Blackfeet community tend to prefer cash over other forms of money. They're still very cash-based. So on paydays, you'll see a large portion you'll see a line out the door really of people cashing their checks. It's a unique factor that we've come to become very able to meet. Additionally, a lot of our customers in that community, they also are used to coming in every year for a school loan, back to school loan. So they'll come in and take out small consumer loans for $500 to buy clothes for their kids going back to school. It's also not uncommon for customers to come into the bank to apply for their holiday loan. And these are customers that come back to us routinely. While we have a credit card option, they're just more comfortable with this. And this is a niche that we're willing to fill for this community. Also, we have a location here in Denver. This is where our headquarters are at. So all of our commercial lending administrative functions are handled out of this office. This is also where Joel, Tom, and I are officing. You'll note that we now have a full service branch. This was added in the fourth quarter of last year. This is we're very, very excited about our branch here in Denver. It is a new addition for us. And we think it's an important step to increasing deposits to both native and non-native clients. On our last screen, you'll also see Native American bank services. So we're not unlike any other bank in that the deposit products that we offer are really offered to anybody. We have full service branch banking, both in Browning and here in Denver. But importantly, we've expanded our online banking products and services and the ability to really bank from anywhere with Native American Bank. We've built out a mobile app, which allows deposits from anywhere in the country. And we have account options for consumer, commercial, and tribes with a full suite of deposit products offered to any of those. With that, I am going to turn the presentation back over to Tom.
Thank you, Shannon. Well done. So what's this really all about? And as we look at social impact deposits, we like to ask the question, where does your money sleep at night? And we get a lot of strange looks. We made a number of presentations, one-on-one or in small groups with that particular question. And it seems like a number of responses we've gotten has been, we've never really thought about it. our deposits are at the bank, and we're just fine, and it is a given. It is something that they don't really think about. And yet we're asking the people that we meet with, hopefully to establish a relationship. That is something you should think about, because deposits can have as big an impact, at least for entities like ours, as anything else. We're not asking for grants or debt instruments or anything like that. We're simply saying, where do you have your deposits today? How would you like them to do something very important tomorrow? Market rates, FDIC insured, you have access to your funding, but what's going on with the deposits that you have? It seems to have been overlooked based on the responses that we've gotten. And in some cases, the entities we talk to, they are familiar with who they bank with, simply because they might not want to bank with somebody else. And yet, in that context, we've had a number of relationships built just simply based on that particular question. And so on a broader perspective, there are mission-oriented financial institutions. If we want to go to the next slide, please. There are mission-oriented financial institutions that are all over the country. I think we've used the term CDFI before, which is for a community development financial institution. Native American Bank is a certified CDFI. There are a number of those. As you can see from the slide, there are a number of banks and credit unions. 4 of those banks on that list are Native-owned. There's also minority deposit institutions, or MDIs, and there are 148 of those nationally, and of those 148, 19 have been designated MDIs that are Native-owned. And there's a number of other banks that may be operating in low and moderate income areas. I think for us, the idea that our mission is to actually focus on that and go to those areas and provide access to capital is, I think, a really important differential. And to be a CDFI, you have to deploy a minimum of 60% of your products and services in low and moderate income areas. So if you have LMIs near or where you are located, for some banks like ours, that's where we go. That's what we do. We're small banks. The average size is 236 million. Those are small community banks. They have boots on the ground. These are not big institutions, and they need all the help they can get. And so we're constantly out there looking for relationships to build on that particular idea that deposits can have a social impact, and in fact they do. If you go to the next slide, simply a pie chart that depicts for you, not only can there be banks and credit unions as CDFIs, there are a number of non-bank CDFIs all over the country. And in fact, more than 50% of the designated CDFIs in the country are non-bank or non-credit union. And consequently, as you look at that particular mix, the non-bank CDFIs tend to be smaller. I would say on average, somewhere in the $5 to $15 million in size. They tend to do micro financing, small dollar lending, financial literacy. They may do mortgages or those types of things. And they help along the individuals that maybe aren't bank ready yet, but become bank ready at some point down the road. And this is an important development for us because we don't see them as competitors, but they're complementary to what we do. If you look at the next slide, and you get an idea from all the CDFI banks in the country, and you look at the low and moderate income areas around the country, are depicted here with the little red circle, and you can see there's an absolute preponderance of those banks in the Mississippi Delta. And Joel's mentioned the Community Development Bankers Association. I happen to be on that board. I know a number of these people and these banks in the south. You can see that they go up along the East Coast, and there's several out in California, but there's a vast portion of the country that is still not served by a community development financial institution. And consequently, we're having conversations all the time with bankers across the country about what it means to be a CDFI and how they can get involved and support the work that's being done in these LMIs. And there is such a need, and yet at the same time, it seems like it's difficult to get banks to do sometimes the difficult thing. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Joel, who will take us through the final slides that we have today. Joel?
Great. Thank you. In many communities, mission-oriented financial institutions are an anchor institution and are on the front line in providing affordable housing, commercial and community development in economically distressed communities. They leverage each dollar of equity up to 8 to 10 times with deposits to generate loanable funds and then use this institutional leverage to provide loans in LMI communities. This creates and retains jobs, promotes small business and entrepreneurship, and restores more of an inclusive economy. This work is more of a driving force for mission-oriented financial institutions rather than just a small segment of the work that a bank does that's intended to just comply with Community Reinvestment Act or CRA requirements. Apologies for that seemingly technical glitch. I don't know how far back I may have lost you. I was talking about mission-oriented financial institutions, specifically the staff that works there and serves on the board is people that are particularly drawn to serving their communities. And related to minority-owned banks in particular, we see a much bigger percentage of representation from minorities that are underrepresented within banking. For example, at Native American Bank, 50% of our staff are made up of tribal members, which is something we're particularly proud of, and we practice Native preference with our hiring. Mission-oriented financial institutions offer traditional banking products as well as services that are not offered by traditional banks, such as financial literacy programs, savings incentives, tailored loan and banking products like credit builder loans, or multilingual staff, to mention a few. Native American Bank, for example, partners with a local nonprofit that provides financial literacy to high school students and opens up accounts through our mini bank program, which we subsidize with higher interest rates and matched savings to help incentivize building responsible savings habits. On the next slide, I wanted to talk briefly about the various types of mission-oriented financial institutions that can appeal to depositors seeking a wide variety of social impact types. This chart looks at the three main approaches to impact. You may have seen we have place-based, targeting impact for certain distressed geographies, people-based, which targets impact for underserved segments of the population and supporting particularly racial equity, as well as thematic, serving things to target certain outcomes like green initiatives or healthcare equity. And we think that Native American Bank is one of the few banks that is working to serve effectively all three areas in some capacity. I wanted to also share on the next slide some resources or places that you can go to find out more about us and other mission-oriented financial institutions to familiarize yourself with the market. The U.S. Treasury lists all of the CDFI banks within the country. The FDIC keeps records on all the banks that are designated as minority-owned or minority depository institutions. The CDBA, as Tom mentioned, or Community Development Bankers Association, is a trade organization for CDFI banks. Also, National Community Investment Fund, or NCIF, does a lot of good work around research about the work that mission-oriented financial institutions do across the country. Lastly, we thought to mention one nascent organization that right now is compiling information on the impact metrics of every bank in the United States to allow depositors to filter and find banks with whom they have mission alignment around certain themes or geographies. It's called Mighty Deposits. So we wanted to highlight on the next slide what's changed. Why hasn't social deposits been given as much attention in the past? There's a few reasons we highlight. To some extent it has, and you may be familiar with the term bank local, right? There's some that counts as a social deposit movement to hold your deposits with the local bank, not some large bank that's just going to take your profits to California or New York. This is an evolution of that around greater impact, but not a lot of banks out there really tout their mission. Even CDFI banks are not raising their hands saying, we're here to bank for racial equity, or we're here to bank for financial inclusion. And so it's somewhat getting the message out. Also, there's a lot of banks out there that do a lot of good work and a lot of good community development work, but it's something of a minority of the work that they do. Most of their lending is still in these conventional, easy areas, and that leads depositors to say, well, that's great, but what do you do with the majority of the funds that you hold, right? So not a lot of banks have as high of what we call mission intensity, as, for instance, we discussed with Native American Bank. And lastly, a lot of people look for ownership and leadership alignment. And that is, few banks, even CDFIs, are not owned or run by the underserved populations that they seek to serve. Like you see with Native American Bank, with our tribal ownership and our leadership, representative of our community with Native Americans and reservation representation. So I'd like to talk about now, really what our need looks like. In order to fund our community development lending, in addition to capital from our tribal owners, we need to raise deposit account balances. We would like any socially conscious person, foundation, or company to consider placing even a small portion of their idle cash into market rate, FDIC insured deposit investments here at Native American Bank to help us in our funding of our community development lending and keep borrowing costs low to our projects. Any kind of deposit helps, whether it's 10,000 or 10 million. We can offer any type of products that you may be interested in, checking, savings, FDIC insured on large amounts well beyond the conventional limit through programs that we offer. I highlighted a few of the social depositors that have already come to work with us, so we're very proud of these relationships and very grateful for those that have shown support so far. Mile High United Way here in Colorado, the RSF Foundation, which was a great relationship that we saw that really is helping us chart our impact activity. Impact Charitable is a donor-advised fund, which we see a lot of interest from. That's in Colorado, but across the country, people that are holding on to funds that need to be deployed for charitable purposes while they wait around to get ultimately to their grant source, having donor-advised funds held here. And lastly, the Olamina Fund, which Andrea mentioned, I believe, the Candide Fund setup, which is a checking and customer in our one of our programs. So I wanted to cover, before we end, a little bit more about how to provide support to Indian country. So beyond social deposits, we went over the need, and if you're inspired to support entities addressing Native American issues, in addition to bank deposits, here are some of the places that we suggest you also look. There are 56 Native non-bank CDFI loan funds, most of which serve a single reservation. Two in particular we'd like to highlight are Native American Community Development Corporation, which is based on the Blackfeet Reservation, and First Nations Owista, which is based here in Colorado. First Nations is a financial intermediary that serves a majority of the native CDFIs in the country, and they raise social funding to downstream to smaller CDFIs that they advise and underwrite. Lastly, we would note that anyone interested in strategic giving into the Native American community can find good resources from Native Americans in Philanthropy, a nonprofit based out of California that really has good resources around finding places to give for those that are interested as a first step. And of course, the Olamina Fund that was recently set up specific to help serve Indian country is a great example of other groups of impact investors that are coming together for this this industry. So with that, that's the end of our presentation, and now we'd like to make sure we have time for questions.
Well, thank you, Joel, and thank you, Shannon and Tom, for a very enlightening presentation. And I especially appreciate how thoroughly you went through the breadth and the history of the issue, all the way to the more propositive aspects of what can be done today. And in that regard, perhaps we can pick up on a couple of questions that came through the chat. One of them was on, let's say, more on the broad relationship side. What relationships do you have with the Federal Reserve's work group on building assets in Indian country?
Well, we have a relationship with particularly the people at the Federal Reserve branch of Minneapolis through their Center for Indian Country Development. They do a lot of research projects on access to capital in Indian country. We've come to present and working groups with that group in particular. So we follow their work and contribute to their work and value their commitment to highlighting this market for sure.
Great. And on the more technical side, a question from Catherine on what kind of loan loss ratio have you had on the commercial loan? What kind of loan loss reserve you have to mitigate the risks?
Great question. So I really like that question because it helps me dispel one of the myths or assumptions that people may have about how risky it is to lend within an Indian country. One of our sources of pride is that when we've deployed loans to tribes, tribal governments, tribally owned businesses, we have yet to take a loss on those loans. And that includes tribal housing authorities, Alaska Native corporations, right? In a lot of ways, this surprises people. It can be more safe to lend into that environment because when you're lending to a government, there's a lot more resources at play and commitment to their community and their project than you may have from someone who owns, a car wash or something that if it gets into trouble, the tribe is often going to be there to step up and say, you know what, I need my tribal members to have access to this grocery store. So I'm going to subsidize it, even if it's not pulling its own weight. And so that's been a really good experience that we've seen lending to tribes. We've had losses from some non-tribal entities like any other bank that have kind of ridden with the general levels that you've seen within the banking industry. But really, we're talking about losses that are, in the low single digits, in a given year below, or something that we view as very manageable. Reserves. And certainly on the reserve side, the size of the reserves we hold is actually a little bit strengthened by the fact that we work with a lot of loan enhancements. The U.S. government has programs like the SBA, but more particular towards Indian country that are provided through BIA loan guarantees or HUD Indian housing guarantees that help us offset a lot of the exposure and keep our loan loss levels at very healthy levels for the exposure that our bank sees which I think are something on the order of over 10% of our exposure related to our portfolios is offset by an allowance, which is very high for a commercial bank. And should be noted that if people are used to looking at loan loss reserves and ratios for non-bank CDFIs, it is really a completely different calculation for FDIC insured banks, capital ratios wise and that kind of thing.
Great, thank you. And I see a couple of questions that came in that, Joel, I hope you or one of your colleagues didn't plan. One is on how can philanthropists and foundations best support your work? And another is great presentation, how do we invest? And I thought in the context of that, it would be interesting since you mentioned the Olamina Fund earlier, and we have Lynn on the line to hear a little bit from their perspective in the on how they went about their process for supporting this, and maybe you can fill that in, Joel, as well, with how philanthropists, foundations, and investors can support you. Does that sound good?
Sure, sure. So, you know, we are not a nonprofit. We don't seek grants generally, which is, you know, one of the biggest tools that foundations and philanthropy has in their toolbox to support organizations. We think there are a lot of places that can go. We are very happy to just talk about the best way to support our bank is through becoming a deposit customer, really. And it actually works well for a lot of giving entities that might have a budget to say, maybe, you know, 10% of my giving this year is going to support Indian country. Well, maybe that portion, when it's waiting to get deployed, while you're figuring out where it goes, where is it sitting? If it's already, you know, earmarked for that impact, it can sit here at Native American Bank and provide a return in the meantime. So that's simply deposits the best way. We've had some entities provide below market rate debts at our hold company that help us turn that into capital, which is a more involved and in-depth relationship that we could entertain with the right investor, but those are fewer and far between or harder to pull off than just a simple deposit. And, you know, Olamina, we love working with the folks over there. And we think we have a lot of mission alignment, which is something that we really value in our customers, is finding places that they value our mission. We look at the work that they do and we feel great that they're in a relationship with us. And I hope I addressed each of the several questions that were in that one. Let me know if I didn't, or if you have any follow-ups.
Yeah, thank you. That was helpful. And I think in part of the question that came in about how foundations can support you, besides the grant piece, did go to the deposit piece. So I see Lynn is on. Would welcome hearing a little bit from you, Lynn, on how Olamina came to work with Native American banks.
Great, thanks, Andrea, and hello, Joel. Yeah, it was, one thing I will say is it was a really easy relationship to develop. Olamina Fund is committed to lending at least $10 million to Native America, and we're really proud that we just did our first loan to Alista. But part of Olamina's values, which is our representation and innovative products and services, and providing access to capital for those communities that have been historically excluded from that access because of systemic racism, meant that we really had to think about who we were partnering with for the fund in terms of banking partners and accounting partners and servicing partners. So Joel and I met about 9 months ago at the First Nations Alista Capital Access convening and really had a discussion about the needs of Olamina and then also the needs of Native American Bank, which have been so eloquently outlined today in this presentation. And we really wanted a relationship that was based on reciprocity. I'd also want to lift up that Native American Bank serves an invisible population in the US, and the impact in seeing people understanding culture and investing in people is invaluable. There is a great need, as everybody has seen here, to invest in basic infrastructure like broadbands and roads and things that we take for granted in the US. There are many institutions that have a cash management strategy and are mission driven and need somewhere to keep their money. And I can speak to how easy that relationship was, how easy the online banking system is, and really enjoyed getting to know Joel and Tom and Teresa throughout that process. So if you, for philanthropy and foundations and other impact investors who do have idle cash sitting, this really is a social impact deposit. It invests in Native people, and it's a way of us being able to say that we see you and we know that you're still here and we want to support the work that you're doing. And that's really the goals of the Olamina Fund overall, is to have people be seen for who they are and what they bring. And we are really focused on building a relationship with Native American Bank, not just from a deposit side, but what co-investments could look like throughout for the projects that they're doing that they outlined in Native America today. So I'm more than happy to talk to anybody offline about either Olamina or why we chose Indian country. But I would say for those who have a mission specifically to serve this population, this is a really, really easy way to move money that will be used towards impact.
Great, thank you very much, Lynn. And I do encourage anyone that is looking at this yet to chat to the folks at Olamina. Joel, before turning it back over to you for some further remarks, I also wanted to bring in a couple of slightly more technical questions from Brian here. One is on the decision to organize a Native American bank as a bank rather than as say, a credit union. Maybe you or Tom have some historical views on that. And the other that is related to the earlier piece about grants versus deposits is on whether there is any way to serve the equity investment needs of small Native-owned businesses that can't or don't want to take on additional debt, or I imagine also alternative sort of revenue-based financing models and the like. But so that we tackle both, maybe, yeah, Tom, I'll turn it over to you for the decision to go as a bank rather than credit union first.
Yeah, I think that's a good fundamental question. The differences between organizing as a bank versus a credit union, I think would lie primarily in the idea that raising capital is much, much easier for a bank than it is for a credit union. There are not many mechanisms for credit unions to, particularly when you're starting out, you're so small, to generate capital. And so I think the founders of the bank felt that it was a better route to go, and particularly as a national bank. So our regular SEC, as an example, we have a home company regulated together, and as it relates to the legislation that originated the charter for the bank, I think there was a lot of groundwork that had to be done, but in the end, I think it's allowed us to grow. We've had multiple private placements done to grow our capital base, and each time we've been successful in acquiring additional capital. As Joel said, if we raise $1 million of capital, it means we can grow 10 million in deposits to then fund the loan. So the capital base we have is call it a 10 to 1. If you're familiar with a bank's leverage ratio, that would be a well-capitalized bank. Opportunities for, so if that answers the question on your origin of the bank, I'll move on to the other question about equity. If there's a anybody interested in equity investments, as I said, we do private placements from time to time. Didn't know this might come up, but we are putting together another private placement memorandum this quarter. It likely will be out by mid-May, and we will be seeking additional capital and issuing new shares to any investors that come forward. And we don't take that lightly, only because it dilutes existing shareholders that elect not to continue to invest, and we're very sensitive to their ownership levels and their ownership interest. And yet, Shannon, when she talked about her pipeline, I think in that slide there were 4 loans that she highlighted, and yet our pipeline today exceeds $100 million of new loans. So we need additional capital, and if you think of that 10-to-1 ratio, that means we need $10 million of additional capital to support $100 million of new credit coming on. And so consequently, the idea of deposits to fund those loans is an important element. And consequently, the need for capital is something that is ongoing, something we've done. We do that in-house. We do not take on a third party to help us with that. And a lot of times in country, the face-to-face relationships are so important, and the trust factor is so important that you need to build that relationship, I think, before you're ever going to get somebody to really step up to the table. And for us, we've been successful at doing that, and are very grateful and humble for the opportunity and grow the bank, which means we're doing the mission that we were originally set out to do.
Great, thank you, Tom. And very interesting to see how you will set up that private placement in a way that both gives you the capital flexibility that you need, and it takes into account the prior shareholders' rights and positions. But I think Brian's question was actually going to the equity needs of native-owned businesses, especially small native-owned businesses. And my understanding, probably similar to his from the slides, is that you provide debt, and the question, I imagine, goes to whether anybody else is addressing the equity needs, or is the debt enough for those businesses?
We're talking about the equity needs of individuals, be they corporations or tribes themselves. And I'm going to ask Shannon to step in and talk about them, because they're many and varied, and our loan products allow us to provide more of a capital resource than you might get at a traditional bank for a particular project. So Shannon.
Sure. So as I understand, the question is, where can individuals contribute to like an equity fund that might go towards projects that we would provide the debt financing for? Is that accurate?
Let me try to reframe it just to make sure that we capture what Brian was asking, even though all these are also interesting questions. He was saying, is there a way to serve the equity investment needs of small native-owned businesses that don't want to hold or take on additional debt? So who's providing the equity? Is that happening, et cetera?
So that's an interesting concept. So, we see equity contributed to the projects that we work on in a number of ways, and a lot of that depends on who the borrower is. So in scenarios where we've got tribal enterprises that are looking for financing, we've actually seen some of the nations in which those projects are located providing equity contributions, and that's usually through some other form of a trust fund or something along that line that in turn directs funds from its own investments to promoting economic development on trust land. So for instance, we're working with a tribe that has a healthy trust fund that, again, they direct the funds towards specific projects. It is equity, so they are giving equity to these projects, but really the idea is that They want to see these businesses started on the reservation. And in both of these cases, the individual business owners are actually constructing something. In one case, it's a hotel. In another case, it's a convenience store. So that's the manner in which we see sometimes these projects happening. In other cases, we have individual business owners that are opening up a restaurant, for instance. The equity investment is much smaller. We've seen that coming through, what they own individually, what they've acquired, accumulated over time. But I think, again, the question is how can that happen so that equity is contributed versus taking on additional debt? And there are organizations that I think will facilitate that. Off the top of my head, nothing is coming to mind that specifically addresses that need. But I'd like to take that as a takeaway, perhaps, to provide some suggestions or alternatives that might be utilized to answer that question.
Great, thank you. And I see we're coming up on time, so if there are no other major questions, we can try to handle anything else that comes in also through a follow-on email. Joel, Shannon, or Tom, if you want to say any closing remarks, if you don't mind, I will also put up your thank you slide and your contact information at the end.
Great. Well, and you can see our closing slide is the sign off, the thank you in 3 different native languages. But we do really appreciate the opportunity to discuss Indian country as a whole, to talk about what need is there, as well as how we have an impact in the communities that we serve. And we'd be happy to answer any additional questions that there may be concerning how to join us in our effort to serve the underserved. So with that, thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much for all the fantastic work they do, for sharing with us a little bit. And as you said at the beginning, which was very well taken, even many well-meaning folks and people that have been really looking at community development and equitable communities in the U.S. have not paid enough attention to this. So I appreciated also how Lynn added that the idea that is part of you being seen and being supported as is needed. So thank you all. Thanks to all that joined us today. If you would like to follow up with us or with the presenters, we will share with you the deck if they don't mind, as well as the recording of the webinar. And here we have Joel's email address, jsmith@nabna.com. And if you are interested in the work of the Investor Network generally, please feel free to contact my colleague, Kurt Lyon, kurt@transformfinance.org. And thank you again, all of you, once again, for joining us. And thank you to the Native American Bank for a fantastic, very enlightening presentation today. So until the next time, thank you.
Thank you.